Fueled by the Orb of Dominance and paranoia, the arch-illager would break his agreement with the Nameless One. Whether the hope of securing an alliance with the obscure zombies and skeletons without that ancient necromancer in the way, or just for hope of obliterating a rival, the former arch would find his plans oddly completed, as four marauding heroes would invade the desert temple just as his own pillagers mobilized. It would be the heroes that annihilated the Nameless One, but who would care as long as the necromancer was gone? And he was gone, wasn't he? Welcome, O viewer, to the 7th of my plethoric lore theories courses, where today's subject is one tied up with the heroes and illagers, but also one important enough to stand in its own right. I'm of course describing the undead, but what do the piglins also have to do with them? And how does even the manipulative Orb of Dominance play the most imperative role to this story? Please do get comfortable, maybe find yourself a snack, because my name is Illager, and it's about time that we explore the history of Minecraft, as well as its ancient and unliving inhabitants. Let's begin. Alright, as we all know, Minecraft Legends is the earliest game in the Minecraft timeline of lore, and it's not necessarily the best source of pure canon, being a story told by biased villagers, but it does have some truths, despite the likely exaggerations made by those barding rusticians. Chiefly, as far as this story is concerned, it gives us the hosts and their flames of creation, which can be used to create just about any mob when given lapis or other materials. Lapis in this game works very similarly to how souls or experience might in other games. And I say just about any mob because there are two major exceptions, the warriors, who have their backstories explained in this game, as well as the witches, who become illager adjacent for largely the same reasons as them. They simply needed to stop the piglins from further ruining the overworld. However, if you actually look at the list of usable mobs from Legends, you'll realize that the warriors and witches are the only real mobs in the roster, alongside being the only ones not summoned by the gifted flames of creation. All the other mobs are fake. Golems are obviously synthetic. Yes, everyone knows that they are simply created with a couple of blocks and then come to life. There's no animation to them unless the pumpkins or aforementioned lapis count. But this video is on the topic of the undead, and how could they be like golems? Aren't they not synthetic, like the copper golems are, or grindstone golems? Well, aren't they? A golem is a weird thing. I made the example with the copper golems above, so we'll use them. They're a body with a life-giving pumpkin. We know that the pumpkin is the life-giving part of this formula because it needs to be put on last and acts as a sort of catalyst to this entire reaction. Or here's a better one, since we're using the word catalyst. The warden is a sack of skulk and bones and what I can only presume is flesh. It stinks, though I'm not sure how many of you have actually met one. The warden is a sort of fleshy, half-decomposed body with a set of souls right in the middle of its chest. It's very much a golem, and it's also very much undead, at least as far as the game files are concerned, and so I have to ask, is a zombie not a golem? See, I would argue that it is. Now, with the questions regarding the golems and their similarly composed allies, the undead, answered, I think it's time to look at their enemies, the piglins, and since we're discussing the undead ruler too, perhaps we should look at their big boss, the Seer. When talking about the Seer, one also has to discuss its most important asset. The entire reason this particular piglin is memorable, even though we, the player, never actually go to the Nether to beat them as a boss. See, the Seer, and heaven only knows how it happens, seems to hold the Orb of Dominance. Weirder still, though, is that it holds the Orb of Dominance captive more than anything. In the game, we see it make weird shrieking noises whenever the Seer uses it, which we might have called normal had we not known that it shouldn't do that when it appreciates its host, as in the later arch-illager. Also, unlike Archie, the Seer is less proud of the orb. It doesn't show it off, keeping it hidden in robes rather than exalting it on a staff. In fact, Archie's staff was made by the orb itself if you've read the Rise of the Arch-illager novel, as if to suggest that the orb was happy to be shown around with Archie, but rather ashamed over the Seer's manipulation. Hence, it doesn't give such a staff to the piglin. This is a pretty coherent story for the orb, who might be made to scheme silently against its oppressor, and it all hinges on the Night Beacon base. a tiny little aid to the Seer's opposition that would lose the Piglins the war and let the orb finally be freed into the Hollow Mountain for Archie to eventually find. Why would someone want to succumb to the undeath the same way that the Nameless One has, and why does life still exist despite the undead's presence? Well, bear with me, because I would like to climb to the top of the hubristic Nameless King's empire and down to the pits of the Piglins' ruins, up to the pinnacle of the Hollow Mountain, and down to the flames of the Nether. Because it all rests on the Orb of Dominance's control of the zombies, not the Nameless Ones. There's only one way to avoid an unwanted demise, and that's to simply learn to want it, as sad as that is. No empire has ever been free of an eventual fall, nor has any individual. But what if the very act of such destruction was what formed the basis of a kingdom? What if the Blazelanders' deaths were not the fall of the land, but some foolish attempt at strengthening it? My theory is that in their attempt to achieve immortality, the zombies, skeletons, and anyone else under the Nameless One would settle for ages upon ages of undeath, and those who didn't choose it were just forced into the deal. But what about the Orb of Dominance? As I mentioned, the Night Beacon's base is of importance to the Orb's plan, and well, we're told by Legends itself that the Piglins' plan with the base is severe in nature, and it'll cause great harm to the overworld if left alone. That doesn't seem to be the case. The base does the Orb's job, creating the first ever night in the overworld, and then it does nothing more. There's no point to its existence unless we've been looking for the point regarding the Piglins, unless we've been looking for the point regarding the wrong group. I would like to propose that the Orb, who fashioned the corrupted beacon for the night base, was actually playing for the heroic side, or rather the undead side, so that the Piglins' very enemies could succeed. We've got an almost totally irrelevant base that exists only to aid the Piglins, but serves to create the night which would eventually allow the undead to roam freely during half the day, meaning that they could fight the Piglins without burning as they normally would have. The Orb of Dominance needed to give the undead enough power to help them defeat the Piglins, but it couldn't obviously give them too much power lest they grow so innumerable that we risk a total extinction of everything. Remember, as far as we know, Ender, the Orb of Dominance, doesn't necessarily want to destroy the overworld, but rather warp it into a second end dimension. Thus, the undead still having half of the day be a sun-filled debuff is rather imperative to this plan. This solves everything. Ender gets out of the Seer's awful porcine hands, and the undead can grow to be another threat for the overworld to see, so that no one group becomes too powerful, which would threaten Ender's plans later. Our final loose end is the Nameless One, the coward that took the great effort upon himself to bring Ender's host, Archie, to his temple, alive, letting that naive little illager have a deal that served largely only him. Our final loose end, Ovior, is merely another appendage of the Orb, which let Archie have one more brief enemy, keeping him from succeeding at Squid Coast the first time because, as far as the Orb is interested, and by proxy the Nameless One, Archie needs to first build a total reliance on the Orb, and to do that, he needs a more antagonistic enemy than the passive villagers. He needs the Nameless One, who will threaten Archie, leaving him to only trust the supposedly all-knowing, him-loving sphere sitting atop his staff. The only reason the undead burn after Legends is because the Orb needed them to be weak, but now that the Orb can use the undead for its and Archie's benefits, it is able to agree to the Nameless One's deal. And the Nameless One gets to have fire-resistant soldiers, where the arch-illager gets his share of said army as well. But that deal is only set up to look like it's giving the Nameless One more power, because that's what the Orb wants everyone to think. It wants Archie, especially, to continue trusting it, because firstly, Archie has no one else as friends, and secondly, everyone else as enemies, also as which he is led to perceive them, such as the Nameless Ruler. Because who is the real beneficiary if the undead don't burn, and the undead are ruled by the Orb? It's not that blasted necromancer, as if to suggest he's only doing it to help the Orb, though he puts up an enemicious facade. Concerning the heroes, this ties into why they wanted to go to the Nether initially. We all know that the heroes went to the Nether in order to find gold. See, The ethereal pits are full of gold, and Minecraft has shown us that gold has a unique property. It can heal creatures, specifically those which are undead. Gold's able to coat melon slices to make healing potions, and carrots covered in the metal are amongst the best foodstuffs in the game. The new golden dandelions are an expansion on this too, as they're able to be an elixir of immortality upon baby passive mobs, keeping them young indefinitely. Igloos, which many people, myself included, believe are the creations of the witches, also have golden apples in them alongside weakness potions, as if the witches were trying to heal the zombie villager priests that are trapped inside. Witches also need gold to be summoned in Legends, with their cauldron structures being the only non-upgrade structures that require it. It seems like if the zombie villager virus is weakened by a potion, it becomes debilitated just enough for the gold to be able to cure them. Of course, this doesn't work on proper zombies, which I theorize have a stronger or alternate version of the virus, which is able to override even the powerful heroes system. Remember that villagers are very much weaker than heroes, and both creatures' respective immune systems likely follow that logic. So why would the heroes, as they begin to slowly realize how threatening the undead are as a whole, flee to the Nether? The answer is gold. In fact, there's a whole song by Lena Raine which is outright called Chrysopoeia, where Chrysopoeia was the medieval attempt at transmuting metals such as lead into gold. Almost as if that's what the heroes really did want. Still, the heroes would fall apart though. That apocalypse would be too much for them as they continued to fight themselves too. This is why there are two variants of most structures, such as the strongholds in ancient cities. I have a different video with more evidence for that, but that's the gist of the theory. It would spell out the end of the heroes, with only a few to remain. Then we return to the beginning of this video's story, which is to say the middle, as the Arch would plan to betray the Nameless One, with whom he would make the deal for the safety of the Illagers. Those four heroes would rapaciously attack, killing the ancient necromancer. Of course, if the king were actually gone, wouldn't the Illagers' pact, because the staff of necromancy had been destroyed, have been nullified? Wouldn't the undead revert to their natural state against the Illagers? Why, in High Block Halls then, do we see the pillagers coexisting with the wraiths and the skeletons and zombies? Sure, in the beginning, even prior to Legend's era, the undead seemed uncharacteristically kind, but the destruction of the staff, even if it restored them to that kind state now, would surely have made them passive to the heroes too. Which it didn't, since the undead still try restlessly to kill the hero in both High Block and its post-seeding levels. If they were going to revert to being kind to the villagers/illagers, then they would need to do the same to the heroes, and if they're not going to be passive to the heroes, then that should apply to the illagers. See the issue. And of course, perhaps they should burn up in Legends after the Night Beacon base is destroyed, but I think this is the one time Legends being a myth, with only a loose representation of canon, aids us as lorists. I don't think it's too much to assume that the villagers who've passed this tale down would have struggled to figure out exactly when the undead began to combust in the sun. The undead had the orb's protection before the base was ruined, just as after Archie makes his deal much later, and everything after the structure's destruction in Legends is merely a mistelling. It's very reasonable to assume that during the pre-Legends era, it was just the Orb of Dominance using its same powers that it shows in the book to keep the undead alive, since they wouldn't theoretically need their population quite so controlled yet. Like I said, the Nameless One isn't gone at all. If nothing else, he's at least been replaced by some other member of the group, some equally forgotten nameless zombie, an unimportant fiend to fill the staff's own role. I wonder how many Nameless Ones there have been now. Maybe it's not just the one who is so old as to have had his name lost to time, but rather it's the one who has simply been an irrelevant host to the staff. In the end, though, it doesn't really matter, because it's all merely another division of the End. Ender, who is puppeteering everything so that the heroes grow weak whilst facing the undead, while the undead, meanwhile, cannot grow against Ender themselves due to the sun. I have no clue what the moral of this video is supposed to be, but thank you for watching it nonetheless all the way through. I'm trying to get to 500 subscribers so I can be eligible for YouTube's new hype points system, but otherwise I hope you enjoyed watching this one. It has been one that I've wanted to make for a while now, though I thought it would be best to make my hero, piglin, and witch videos as a sort of backdrop to this one. So anyone who hasn't seen those can better understand this video, and those who haven't seen them can now watch them in case they didn't quite get this one's ideas. I've got a playlist of all my theories in order, so that should help in case you're struggling to find them as well. I know that this one seems like a more absurd theory or wacky one, but I think once you understand the double enemies and fake friends, it really rather makes sense. Still, please remember, O viewers, not to take my words as canon. I always want to make the lore an open discussion, and if you have a better idea, please do share it with me and the rest of the commenters down below. Put that into action, please, then, by remembering to keep on speculating over the game's canon, thinking about its history, and no matter what, keeping on loring, because I'll see you next time. Bye. I'm in the Blazelands' famous desert temple, once thought to have been the home of the legendary Nameless One, to try and find some of those easy pottery shards from as old as 1 million years ago. Oi, Struth! We found one, mates, and that's a real gobsmacking beauty. We can learn so much off of these in archaeology, and this here dinkum is a— Ah!